Name is Jim Morris, James E. Morris, I guess. And I was in E5 when I was discharged, and I was assigned to the 3rd Field Hospital, which is just on the outskirts of Saigon. I was drafted.
You were drafted.
Yeah, I didn't really want to go. That was my last choice as a places to go or things to do in my life. I was 22, I guess. I had a college deferment, and so that kept me out for the 4 years, which I am really grateful for, because I'm not sure I'd ever finish school if I had to leave and come back. And I knew I had an obligation to the country, but the Army was the last thing I wanted to do. My dad was career Army, so I grew up around it. I knew the military, and it's not anything I want to be a part of. But I also knew I was subject to the draft, and if I was called, I was gone. And there was an obligation, and I'm proud that I did. A normal tour of duty in Vietnam was 1 year, and normally, especially as a draftee, when you only had a 2-year obligation, you would only do 1 year in country.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, when I got sent over, I only had 9 months left to serve. I really didn't think I was going to have to go, but at the last minute they said, "We need you and you're going." So I was married at the time, so I really didn't want to go to Vietnam either. My brother was over there at that time. And so I kind of passed him coming back as I was headed over. I went to school for a degree in wildlife biology. So there was a lot of tie-in back and forth with the anatomy, physiology, the chemistry classes. I had a good foundation, better so than most of the medics in the Army, and especially with a college degree. And that was beneficial to me. As a draftee, you took whatever they gave you. There was you couldn't even request anything. They picked it. And what most of us didn't want to do was end up in the infantry. But being a medic was just one step above that, because you were with the infantry most of the time. That was part of it. We were in one place.
Okay.
We didn't move, and MASH didn't much, but I was at a field hospital, which is kind of a step above a MASH unit. But in comparing that to MASH, the team that we had was fantastic to work with. Most of the doctors, well, all the doctors I served with were draftees. They didn't want to be there. We had a lot of nurses. I served with a lot of female officers. Most of them were disillusioned by the time I got there. They didn't want any part of the Army. But we had a job to do, and so we worked as a unit. And when we worked 7 days a week, but when we had a little time, we did have some fun parties and get together and mix. And of course, the fraternizing was really looked down on, but the officers were ready to take the heat for it, and they'd cover. So we did have some fun too. Being around Saigon, we were pretty well able to get what we wanted.
Okay.
There was a tremendous black market in alcohol and cigarettes and stuff like that, and you could buy it for a nickel on the dollar over there and sell it for 5 times, 10 times that, and a lot of guys did, but we didn't. And so we had ration cards, and you could get 3 cases of beer, 3 bottles of wine, and 3 quarts of liquor a month. They punched it out and kept track of it, and we had they called a Class 6 store, which was a liquor store. Could get that stuff. Well, a lot of the nurses liked wine, and I didn't drink it, so I'd trade my wine ration for beer, and I had cases of beer stacked all the time. That made sure we didn't run out. But there were guys that were always smoking pot, and there was dope around. And some guys were unfit and unable to perform because of it. But personally, I didn't have any contact with it. I didn't want any contact with it. I wanted to do my 2 years, do a good job, and get out.
And then go home.
And go home. I think most of it, I didn't want to go. I just didn't want to be in the Army. But but I also had an obligation to, as part of being in this country, to serve over there. So if I was called, I did go. But most of us would a lot rather been home. And I was married, and so there was nothing over there for me. But I worked my butt off when I was in the country, and I think excelled at what I did do. working with patients, and we were kind of the second line after we did in mass casualty situations get in dozens sometimes of ambulances at a time. We didn't have a landing pad, but the helicopters could land less than a mile from us and offload patients into ambulances and bring them into us. So there were times when we had stretchers lined up just down the walkways, go through triage and figure out who had the best chance, who needed the attention the most, who wasn't going to make it anyway. And so you had to ration your time, especially when people were critical. We kept patients longer too. A lot of times they weren't well enough to even be transported out of country. And so we had a lot of patients like that, and we could keep there and stabilize till we could get them to a point where they could ship them to Tokyo or some of the bigger hospitals back here, to Fort Sam and some of the ones in California. It did rain. I've never seen water come out of the sky like it could in monsoon season. And it got hot, but at least we had a solid roof, so we had a very, very adequate place. We had a pretty good compound, and we felt fairly secure. Even as large a city as Saigon was, there was a curfew, and every night at midnight, everything shut down. So if there was anything moving, there was a problem. There were no Vietnamese out at all, and if you saw a vehicle, it was either somebody that shouldn't be there or it was military vehicles. I didn't worry about it. I interacted with them quite a bit. I had several working for me with South Vietnamese that worked as nurses' aides, worked as orderlies. They were great people. Vietnam had been at war for a long time before we got there, and so it was almost a way of life with them. But for the most part, we had run of the city. So we could go out in the local economy, we could eat, we could go to Vietnamese bars, we could go into their shops, eat in their restaurants. There wasn't much they fixed that I would eat. It was fish parts, and a lot of it pretty gooey looking, and sauces and spices, and I ate very little of it. It stunk. There was a lot of rice balls, that kind of stuff. I had to look. It was interesting to see what they lived on, what they had, and of course they were, I think when the war broke out, or when it really started escalating, there were probably a million people in Saigon. By the time I got there were over 6 million. It was really tight. Traffic, unbelievable. Though the only accidents I ever saw usually had a U.S. vehicle involved in them. Somehow they managed to snake their way through that stuff. You'd come to intersections with 6, 8 streets coming in, and it would flow. And there was the screaming and the hollering and the horn honking, and lots of two-cycle machines. The gasoline, I don't remember a gas station even, but they'd sell gasoline and quart whiskey bottles out along the street, and there'd be some guy sitting out there with 6, 8 tin bottles of gasoline, and they kept those old machines running. It was kind of incredible to see. I was very fortunate in the assignment that I had. I worked out too, and when we did get some downtime, we would take the medical team, go to orphanages. We dealt with a lot of Vietnamese kids. I worked a lot with Vietnamese orphans in the hospital that had been hurt, shot, run over, stuff like that, damaged from the war. And that was actually part of my job, was dealing with the kids. And that part was kind of neat, having the little kids around. And my wife used to make clothes and stuff and send them over and collect stuff. I got boxes and boxes of stuff sent from the U.S. that would take to the orphanages, clothe the kids with, a few little toys, things like that. It's kind of neat to see.